Chapter 6. Charlotte Plum continued to monopolize Mama's time. No matter when I stopped by her suite, I discovered Joel's fiancé within the invalid chamber. Mama accepted her presence meekly and silently gave in to her demands. They set the wedding date for early June. Maggie Wills, the local seamstress, appeared frequently. Yards of Chantilly lace and white organdy appeared in Mama's rooms. Miss Plum stood on a small dais with fabrics draped about her body. "I cannot abide high necklines," Lottie croaked, ripping away the high collar Maggie fashioned for the dress. Balling it in her fist, she threw it into the seamstress's face. "How many times do I have to tell you? Everstowe brides are always covered completely by their gowns and veils," Mama quietly interrupted. "It's quite traditional." "Traditions change," Lottie sneered, shrugging aside my mother's suggestion. "And it's about time. This entire place is suffocating with traditions." Mama blanched and shrunk into her divan's cushions. A weak hand fluttered to her throat, and she gasped for air. Jane Grant appeared instantly with a bottle of smelling salt. She waved it beneath Mama's upturned nose, reviving her instantly. "Miss Priscilla is here," Jane stated softly. "Do come in, Priscilla," Mama invited warmly. "Maggie wishes to fit you for your bridesmaid attire." "Yes, Mama," I replied, stepping fully into her sitting room. After much pressure from Mama and Miss Plum, I reluctantly agreed to act as a bridesmaid. I did not wish to become a part of the ceremony. I debated with myself about attending. Nevertheless, my parents thought I should represent the family and Grayson, who would act as an usher. I gasped audibly when Maggie Wills approached me holding a chartreuse satin fabric. The color appalled me and certainly didn't suit my fair complexion. "Ah! I can't wear that color," I exclaimed haughtily. "Certainly you can, Missy Prissy," Lottie remarked, approaching me. She pressed her scornful face close to mine. "It is my wedding, my decision. You'll wear my chosen color, or you won't participate in my wedding." "Fine," I countered swiftly. "I won't participate." "Really, Priscilla," Mama moaned, her face growing pale. "Mind your temper. Let's try to get along." "Must I, Mama?" I wailed, sinking to my knees before the divan. I buried my head in her lap, and she ran her fingers through my long brown hair. "I don't know why you are so against me, Miss Prissy," Charlotte exclaimed briskly. "Once I'm married to your darling brother, I will become your sister. We should act sisterly toward each other, shouldn't we?" I shrank back, repulsed by the thought of her becoming my sibling by marriage. How could Joel bring this uncouth person into our lives? How could he become close enough to her to impregnate her? What happened to my usually calm older brother? I wondered as I cringed away from Miss Charlotte. What occurred at Oxford to bring about the sudden change? "Chartreuse is my favorite color," Lottie continued. She loomed above me with her hands planted firmly on her wide hips. "Moreover, My 3 sisters have not complained about the color. Nor my brother or father. They will arrive shortly before the ceremony. You have made the arrangements, dear mother, have you not? Yes, certainly, Mama responded dully. At the tone of her voice, I knew she was not particularly thrilled about the Plum clan's arrival. We have set aside rooms on the second floor of the West Wing. Unwillingly, I allowed Maggie to drape the ugly colored fabric about my body. My stomach churned at the thought of wearing it, even for the shortest period. Nevertheless, Mama urged me to cooperate, and I swallowed my pride. As soon as I could depart, I sought out Grayson. "Chartreuse, Gray," I cried, plunking down beside him on the summer-house steps. "What's chartreuse?" my brother asked innocently. "The bridesmaids' gowns," I moaned, clutching my stomach and pretending to vomit. "The color is ugly and bright. Miss Charlotte wants leg of mutton sleeves that stick out on the shoulders like balloons and tight from the elbows to the wrist." "Oh, Gray, I feel sick." She couldn't have picked anything uglier. There, Grayson commiserated, patting my hand comfortingly. "It's only for one day. You can manage it, can't you, Prissy?" "Oh, stop calling me that, Gray," I shouted, unable to control my anguish. "Lottie is using it all the time now. I hate it. She doesn't have any rights. You're the only one who calls me Prissy." "I'll try," my brother solemnly promised. "I'll even bite my tongue if it starts to come out." He stuck out his red tongue, then gently sunk his teeth into it. "I love you for it, Gray," I exclaimed, leaning to kiss his cheek. "And, by the way, the men's waistcoats are in chartreuse too." Grayson paled and shrank away. He had not considered that he would have to wear the sickening color. "Furthermore, Charlotte's family is coming," I blurted, grasping his arm. "There are 3 sisters, a brother, and her father. There's going to occupy rooms in the West Wing. I imagine they are all exactly like Miss Plum." "Oh, how could Joel do this to us?" Maybe they aren't so bad," Grayson remarked. But his Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed hard. "I bet they're all exactly like her," I moaned, burying my face into my older sibling's shoulder. "They'll all leave after the ceremony, Prissy, Priscilla," Gray firmly decided. "But Charlotte will stay," I added, grimacing. "Forever and ever and ever." Beside me, Grayson sighed heavily and pressed his arm into my shoulders. I snuggled into his warmth and let the tear trickle down my cheeks. Spring's new birth did not hold the same pleasure for me as it usually did. The bright daffodils faded into a dull yellow, and the crocus's purple hues lost their luster. Winter clung to my heart, reaching out with icy fingers to choke back the season's freshness. I felt my happiness slipping away beneath the dominance of Charlotte Plum. Footsteps crunching on the gravel path alerted us to someone's approach. Glancing up, I noticed Joel striding toward us with his fiancée clinging to his elbow.
She carried a lacy parasol and wore a wide-brimmed hat adorned with periwinkles and a long ostrich feather. When Joel whispered into her ear, she brayed with raucous laughter that echoed around the silent garden. My brother chuckled merrily.
"Oh," Lottie groaned when they stopped before Gray and me. "You're here." Her disdain showed in her voice. "It seems, Joel dear, we encounter the children wherever we go." "Children!" I huffed, leaping to my feet. "I'll have you know I'm—" "Save it, sis," Joel quipped, cutting me off. "Why don't you two find something else to do? Float your boats on the pond or something. Lottie and I want some time alone." "Float out boats?" I sputtered, indignant. "We haven't floated boats on the pond since we were 10 or 11.
Your brother is telling you to get lost," Charlotte interrupted hotly. "Take the hint and get lost. We have things to do."
"Yeah, and I know what you're going to do," I cut in, recalling the last time I encountered them in the summer house. "Come on, Priscilla," Grayson urged, making a point of using my correct name. "We know when we aren't wanted." He strode purposely along the path and disappeared behind the hedgerows. "We were here first, Joel," I snapped, hastening away. "Don't you forget that. We were here first." "We heard you the first time, Missy Priss," Lottie hollered shrilly. I rushed away quickly, her cackle following me along the path. "I hate her," I exclaimed as I rushed past Grayson, who meandered near the Venus fountain. "And I hate the color chartreuse." Chapter 7. April turned into May, but hardly anyone noticed the change of month. Preparations for the wedding continued to dominate our time. Charlotte Plum monopolized Mama's sitting room. She made it clear she did not wish anyone to disturb them. Finally, the invitations went into the mail, and the RSVPs began to arrive. I never realized we knew that many people. The chartreuse bridesmaid gown hung in my wardrobe. I tried to avoid looking at it. However, the bright color attracted my attention every time I glanced inside. The sight of it made me want to croak. Caustically, I vowed to destroy the ugly dress as soon as the ceremony ended. "My bridesmaids will wear pale yellow and carry clusters of white roses," I dreamed aloud. Grayson and I sprawled beneath an elm overlooking the meadow pond. Our horses nibbled at the grass nearby. "I'm going to walk down the aisle holding a cascade of yellow daffodils." "Lovely," Gray murmured, selecting a finger sandwich from the picnic basket between us. "You will make a beautiful bride, Prissy." "More beautiful than Miss Plum," I remarked smugly. "Her dress is too tight. Her breasts spill out over the neckline. I don't know how she manages to keep them in place." Grayson grimaced and threw his sandwich into the overgrowth. He cringed at the mention of women's body parts. They did not seem to entice him. "Lottie wants us to carry purple gladiolas as our bouquets," I continued, making retching noises. "Imagine chartreuse and purple. She has no color sense." "I wish you wouldn't make those noises while we're eating," Pris, Grayson complained, glancing in my direction. He returned the raspberry tarts to the picnic basket. Why don't we forget Miss Plum and wade in the pond? It's quite warm for May, don't you think? I thought it was my temperature rising over the wedding, I remarked, pulling off my shoes. I would like to wade, but Miss Young thinks it's still too cold for swimming. She said not to go into the pond.
Daintily lifting my calico skirt, I rose and edged into the meadow pond. The calm waters refreshed me immediately. Grayson approached more cautiously than me. Dipping his toe in, he withdrew it sharply. He wrapped his arms around his slim torso and shivered.
I didn't realize it was still this cold, he criticized sharply. Brr.
It's not that bad, Gray, I called back, wading further into the pond. I lifted my skirt higher and felt the water rise around my knees.
As I drifted further from shore, I recalled past picnics beside the meadow pond. Joel usually accompanied us with his fly fishing gear and chastised Gray and me for splashing and chasing the fish away. We would glance at him furtively and continue with our pleasure despite him. Finally acclimating to the cool water, Grayson paddled along the pond's bank. I continued moving forward until the water reached my waist. My lilac-sprigged skirt floated on the surface around me. When my brother drew close enough, I sent a wall of water over his head. "I'll get you for that, Prissy," Gray hollered, plunging toward me. Grabbing me by the waist, he pushed me below the surface. I struggled against him, finally pushing myself back into the fresh air. "Oh, my hat," I exclaimed, watching the floral confection bobbing on the rippling water. Hastily I rushed for it, but it moved further away. Grayson joined in the chase. Nevertheless, each time we reached it, it drifted an additional distance. Joyfully, our laughter floated across the vast meadow.
"Whew, Joel, look at the wildlife at play," Miss Plum's Cockney-accented voice called stridently over our heads. "You never know what you might see while riding along country lanes."
Grayson and I froze in place. Our eyes turned toward the pond's edge, where Joel and his paramour sat astride their horse. He glared down upon us disdainfully. "I cannot imagine what Miss Young will say when she sees the both of you," our older brother stated coolly. "I'm positive she has told you to stay out of the pond." "I don't care what Miss Young has to say," I responded defiantly. "I cannot see where it is your business, either, Joel."
"Is she always this impertinent to you, lover?" Charlotte exclaimed, edging her horse closer to Joel. "She is Prissy, isn't she? Her name suits her."
Swiftly, Miss Plum turned her horse away. Our elder brother followed her quickly. Grayson and I continued to stare as they retreated. The afternoon's joy dissipated with the interruption. I waded toward the shore, my hat forgotten. Gray stumbled after me and fell onto the plaid picnic blanket. I squatted and began placing our leftover lunch in the wicker basket. We mounted our horses and rode home sedately. Papa sat on the veranda, making it impossible for us to avoid him. We bowed our heads and strode past him, hoping he would overlook our disarranged garments. "I see the drowned fish have returned," our father chuckled. "I assume you both fell in simultaneously again." "I suppose we did, Papa," I stated, bending to kiss his cheek. "We always do, don't we?" "I expect you do, child," he answered merrily. "It happens every year at just about this time." "We have to get in without Miss Young noticing us," I ventured hopefully. That does present a problem." Papa tugged on his goatee. "Perhaps," rising, he summoned Yates. The butler arrived promptly. "Please ask Miss Young and Mr. Blanchard to join me in my office. I want a word with them." "At once, sir." Yates bowed at the waist and departed. Within moments, he returned to announce that the pair awaited him as directed. As soon as Papa stepped into his office through the French doors, Gray and I scurried inside. We were wearing fresh clothes in the nursery window seat by the time our teachers reappeared. Smiling brightly, we greeted them and asked for a tea service. "You two scalawags aren't fooling me," Claudia Young exclaimed, her hands on her hips. "It's the same charade every year. A summons from Papa around when you're expected home from your first spring picnic." Mr. Blanchard stood behind my governess and frowned at us. He didn't have to say a word. Miss Young always acted as the spokesperson for both. However, we knew he disapproved of our actions. "We fell in, Miss Young," I stated innocently. Simultaneously, Grayson added, casting his eyes downward. "I fail to see how you can both fall in at the same time," my governess complained, then added, "every year." "That's just the way it is." I shrugged nonchalantly. "Humph." Mr. Blanchard added his only comment to the situation. "Miss Plum was there with Joel," I continued glibly. "She was ever so rude to us, wasn't she, Gray?" "She was indeed." Grayson nodded rapidly. "You deserved it at your age," Miss Young stated tersely. "You have outgrown your foolishness. It's about time you acted like ladies and gentlemen." "I would say we've outgrown the nursery," I commented, nudging my brother. "Wouldn't you agree, Gray?" Before he could respond, Marty appeared with the tea cart. We moved languidly toward the tea table where the governess presided. Miss Young poured out while Grayson and I sat beside each other demurely. We applied clotted cream and jam to our scones and sipped our refreshments. Following afternoon tea, I stopped by the library to pick up a new copy of The Bostonians by Henry James. I looked forward to reading it to Mama and hoped to catch her alone. Miss Plum habitually dominated her time, but she was out riding with Joel. "Good afternoon, Mama," I sang, entering her suite. "I've brought The Bostonians." I showed her the book and then bent to kiss her cheek. "I hope you are well today, Mama." "As well as I can expect," my mother responded, her voice dim. "Preparing for a wedding is quite exhausting." Yes, and so it must, I answered, pulling up a stool and sitting down. I opened the novel to page 1. Particularly with Charlotte Plum. She's ever so demanding. You shouldn't criticize, Priscilla, dear, my mother murmured, sinking back on her pillows. However, my head does ache after a session with her. I did not respond. Instead, I bent my head and began to read. I had barely finished the first page when the door banged open. Mama leapt in her skin and clasped her hands to her breasts. The blood rushed from her cheeks. Closing my book, I knelt beside her and took her thin hands in my warm ones. Don't you know how to knock? I quickly chastised Miss Plum. You've given Mama a shock. Oh, have I? Lottie smirked and swiftly approached the divan. Joel and I stopped by the church on our way back. It's quite quaint. I didn't expect anything quite so small.
It's not Westminster Abbey, you know, I snidely remarked. My nemesis remarked dismissively. Drawing a chair, she sat beside Mama and glared at me menacingly. My mind grappled for an intelligent quip but failed to discover one. My shoulders sank, and I fled the room, pivoting on my heel. The door banged shut behind me. Angrily, I threw my novel against the wall. It clattered to the floor, and I stepped over it. I longed for cozy afternoons with Mama. How I enjoyed reading to her out loud and her soft presence. Mama did not have much a life, stuck in her rooms all the time. The little things were important to her. Miss Plum interrupted our pleasure. She made me feel small and inconsequential. As the wedding approached, I felt less and less important. My once happy life shriveled along with my heart. I felt a certain bitterness beginning to form within me. I knew I should not become jealous. Nevertheless, the awkward feeling continued to invade my consciousness. Balling my hands into fists, I willed it to stop, but I felt overcome by the intense emotion. Chapter 8. The wedding date approached quickly. A week before the ceremony, Charlotte Plum's family began to arrive. Her elder brother, accompanied by her two sisters, appeared in the station trap on a bright June afternoon. They tumbled out of the small conveyance and gawked at Everstow Manor. Horace! Lottie exclaimed, rushing onto the front portico. Her brother swooped her into his arms and firmly kissed her on the mouth. "Coo! You struck a gold mine here, Lil, sis." The brother's voice echoed around the ample space. "Your fiancé must be worth a bob or two." "Lucky for me, I'm fertile." Charlotte Plum laughed uproariously. She continued to cling to her sibling in an overly familiar manner. She released herself and turned to her waiting sisters. "Close your mouths before you let the flies in. They don't like gawkers around here. They're very la-da-da." "La-da-da," the two young women sighed, bumping shoulders. Gray and I stumbled upon them as we sauntered around the corner on our afternoon stroll. When Charlotte noticed us, she hastened to beckon us to join them. At the sight of her flailing arms, we both pivoted to retreat. However, she continued to call, and trapped, we slowly approached. "May I present my brother, Horace," Charlotte introduced, her voice haughtily nasal. "And my sisters, Bertha and Despina. Pleased to meet you, I'm sure." My brother stepped forward, extending his hand graciously. "Grayson David Everstow, at your service." Charlotte and the two women stared at his outstretched hand disdainfully. Linking arms, they moved as a group toward the front door. Horace shadowed the trio. The door slammed in our faces as we attempted to follow them inside. "How dare they?" I huffed, quaking with fury. Gray did not respond. Instead, he opened the door and stood back for me to proceed before him. Inside, the foyer felt crowded with people. Papa rushed from his office to extend his personal greetings while Yates stood nearby. A look of disgust crossed the butler's face. I could understand his dismay. Joel clattered down the swooping staircase and slid to a halt beside Charlotte. Placing his arm around her waist, he drew her close. Without warning, they tightened their embrace and kissed heartily. "Well done, my man," Horace chortled, clapping Joel on the back hard. He laughed uproariously. Instead of chastising the impertinence, my elder brother grinned widely. Astonishment crossed Papa's face, and then it flattened. Grayson and I edged closer to each other and grasped hands. "Welcome to Everstow," our father greeted. "Our home is yours for as long as you wish to stay." Inwardly, I cringed at his invitation. I realized they might take full advantage of the situation. However, my thoughts were interrupted by a sudden crash. Spinning, I noticed Despina standing above a shattered Ming vase. Yates rushed forward and stooped to pick up the pieces. "Irreplaceable," the butler muttered to himself. "Thousands of years old. Priceless." Behind him, Papa's face paled. The ancient vase had belonged to the family for several centuries. The prized possession meant a great deal to him. "They always called me Butterfingers," Despina chuckled merrily. "Too bad about your doodah." Shrugging, she stepped behind Bertha and buried her face in her sister's shoulder. "Never mind." Charlotte shrugged nonchalantly. Swiftly, she turned to me. "Since you aren't doing anything, Prissy, show my brother and sisters to their rooms. Be a good little girl, will you?" My temperature flared, bringing scarlet plumes into my cheeks. How dare she order me around as though I were a servant? "Anne-Marie will show them up," I announced, moving toward the bell pull. I yanked it hard, summoning one of the upstairs maids. The young servant appeared instantly. "Miss Charlotte's family has arrived. Will you take them to their rooms?" "Yes, miss." Anne-Marie bobbed a short curtsy, her brown curls swaying beneath her lacy cap. "This way, if you please." Charlotte glared at me maliciously as she swooped toward the staircase. Linking arms with her sisters, she mounted the steps and then stopped. Turning, she addressed Yates. "Have their trunks sent up immediately when they arrive," she ordered sharply. "And don't linger." Yates scowled in return but held his comments in check. He did not enjoy taking orders from Miss Plum. It disturbed his dignity. The family treated him with the utmost respect for as long as I can recall. Both his father and grandfather buttled at Everstow Manor. They held sway in the servants' quarters and controlled the entire staff. Nevertheless, since Charlotte's arrival, Yates became subject to her demands, and she looked down upon him. The newcomer often called him to perform menial tasks and treated him like a scullery maid. He cringed at the idea of hauling their trunks to their rooms. The task would fall to one of the gardeners or a stable hand. Papa returned to his study until dinner-time while Gray and I hurried up to the nursery. Miss Young glanced over her half-glasses at us when we burst into the room. She sat at her desk grading our daily assignments. Mr. Blanchard stood behind her, massaging her shoulders. "The royal family has arrived," I announced, curtsying deeply. "Really, Priscilla, whatever do you mean?" Claudia Young exclaimed questioningly. "Surely you cannot mean the Queen." "Certainly not," I rebuffed harshly. "The Plums, or at least the younger members, appeared moments ago in the station trap. Needless to say, they are equally obnoxious. They are named Horace, Bertha, and Despina. The two ugly sisters look like they stepped out of Cinderella." "Really, Priscilla," my governess coolly stated. "Surely, they are not that bad." "You haven't seen them," Gray cut in sharply. "They are taller than me and have hooked noses and scarlet mouths that always frown. The brother is brawny and looks like a prize fighter. I wouldn't want to meet him in a dark corner." "Despina broke the Ming vase," I stated bleakly. "Never mind." My voice rose in falsetto. Miss Plum said as though the priceless vase meant nothing to her. "Papa didn't say anything, but he's furious." "The Ming," Mr. Blanchard mused, frowning. For a moment, he looked as though he would vomit. "However, did that happen?" Miss Young exclaimed breathlessly. She picked it up and dropped it. Grayson answered, mimicking Despina motions. He held the invisible vase and then released his fingers. His eyes grew wide and innocent as he gazed down at his feet. "I cannot swear to it, but it looked like she did it on purpose." "She would," I muttered disdainfully. "Really, Priscilla, how can you say that?" Claudia Young gasped. "At least give her the benefit of the doubt before you throw around accusations." "That goes for you too, Grayson." "She did it on purpose," I restated firmly. "Under the circumstances, Gray and I will eat our dinner up here tonight. I do not wish to mingle with the Plums." "As you wish," the governess agreed without argument. Usually, she would have insisted we join the family. However, I believed she understood our chagrin. Grayson and I remained in the nursery despite the summons to dinner. Anne-Marie delivered our trays, and we settled at the schoolroom table to dine. The door flung open as we removed the covers from our roast beef and Yorkshire puddings. Charlotte Plum paraded into the room with Joel on her heels. "We expected you in the dining room," she remarked, hovering over us menacingly. "What are you doing up here?" "We did not wish to join you or your family," I responded coolly. Lifting my knife and fork, I addressed my meal. "How dare you!" Charlotte screamed, snatching my plate from the table. Spinning, she flung it against the wall. The china plate crashed to the floor, shattering into pieces. Gravy dripped down the rose-printed wallpaper, leaving an ugly stain. "How dare you!" I echoed, rising angrily. "Look at the mess you made. You're a beast, an animal. Why don't you go back to the jungle where you belong? Take your heathen family with you." Miss Plum stepped toward me and, raising her arm, slapped me across the face. Wheeling backward, I raised my hand to my stinging cheek. Grayson leapt between us instantly while Joel cowered against the nursery door. "Apologize," my middle brother shouted, glaring at Miss Plum. "You heard him," Charlotte declared, pinning me with cruel eyes. "Apologize. Not Priscilla. You," Grayson cut in sharply. "Apologize to my sister or leave. We don't appreciate violence here. These are our private rooms, and you have violated them." Minutes ticked past. Miss Plum continued to glare at us while Joel remained in the background. Gray moved beside me and placed his arm protectively around my shoulders. I pressed close to his side. "One day, in the near future, you will address me as Lady Charlotte," my brother's pregnant fiancée finally stated. "Things will become drastically different for you two when that day arrives. Believe me, I will not forget the disrespect you have shown me since my arrival here." Spinning on her heels, she marched toward the door. "Come along, Joel." Our elder brother ogled us scornfully before shadowing Miss Plum into the corridor. The door slammed behind him. Turning to Grayson, I buried my head in his shoulder and sobbed. I never believed anyone could ill-treat us in our own home. The comfortable sanctuary of our private rooms fell away, and we felt menaced by a crude newcomer. "Whatever happened in here?" Miss Young declared, entering from her private suite. Miss Charlotte came in and threw Prissy's dinner against the wall, Gray explained quickly. "She was mad because we didn't join them downstairs." "Good heavens!" the governess exclaimed, bending to clean up the broken plate. "Well, I suppose you should have gone down to dinner. Nevertheless, it certainly didn't deserve such a wild reaction. I'll see to it that Anne-Marie replaces your dinners." Miss Young hustled away to reorder our meals. "Someday, she will become Lady Charlotte," I mused, plunking down in the window seat. Heaven help us. I buried my face in my hands. "Papa would have to die first, Prissy," Grayson announced, sitting beside me. He drew me close in another hug. "It won't happen for a long time." I'm sure Papa is most healthy, and he won't die anytime soon. I nodded my head, reassured. However, I continued to dread the day when Joel became Lord Everstow. He allowed Charlotte to drag him around by the nose and became more ineffective as each day passed. I did not look forward to the hell we would experience in the future. Chapter 9. Bright morning sunshine beaming through my bedroom window awoke me the following morning. I sat up and stretched, wishing for a better day than the previous one. Outside my door, I heard Grayson whistling on his way to breakfast. I hurriedly dressed and caught up with him on the stairs. "Good morning, Starshine," my brother exclaimed, cheerfully. He kissed my cheek lightly and smiled pleasantly. "Good morning," I returned, slipping my arm through his elbow. "I hope the Plums enjoy sleeping until late afternoon." "Me too." Gray nodded and continued to whistle. Loud voices permeating from the dining room drew us up short. Exchanging worried glances, we entered to find the Plums hovering over the sideboard. Instead of selecting plates to bring their meal to the table, they ate directly from the chafing dishes. Papa's place remained empty. His newspaper lay folded at its usual place along with his coffee cup and napkin. Usually he ate his breakfast punctually. As Grayson and I hovered in the doorway, we noticed Horace cram an entire sausage into his gaping mouth. Copying her brother, Despina pushed one between her lips and chewed noisily. Charlotte poked a kidney with her fork while Bertha shoveled up scrambled eggs. I felt my stomach turn upside down. "Begging your pardon, Miss Priscilla, Mr. Grayson," Yates whispered, appearing behind us. "Your father is dining on the garden patio this morning. He wishes you to join him." "Thank you, Yates," I answered, squeezing his arm with gratitude. "Is Joel with him?" "No, miss. Mr. Joel is nursing a sore head," the butler responded. "He accompanied Mr. Horace to the Three Horseshoes last evening. They stayed out quite late and came home singing. I am surprised you didn't hear them." Gray and I exchanged worried glances. Joel rarely drank and did not frequent public houses. Apparently Horace was leading him astray rather quickly. "We'd best join Father," I commented, hurrying away. Grayson followed at my heels. However, as we passed through the foyer, the rest of the Plum family arrived. "Where's my daughter?" a rough voice called out bellicosely. My brother and I came face to face with a squat balding man. His shabby coat barely stretched around his protruding belly. Beside him stood a wispy thin woman wearing a faded calico dress. She clutched a worn handbag in calloused hands. Quickly, Grayson and I dodged toward the French doors, hoping to avoid them. However, we were not fast enough. "You there," the voice shouted. A bent finger pointed in our direction. "Where is Charlotte Plum? Her father wants to know." "In the dining room," Gray answered, pointing the way. He took me by the arm and led me away. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of fresh, clean air. The Plum family stifled me and made me feel dirty. I shivered, despite the warm June sunshine. Papa sat at a white wrought iron table, and we approached him swiftly. As soon as we sat, Yates appeared with plates of eggs and sausage. "Good morning, Papa," I greeted, smiling warmly. "It's a lovely day to eat al fresco." "Indeed," my father agreed, lifting his coffee cup. "Pardon me," a small voice interrupted our breakfast. "I've lost my way. I'm looking for my mum and dad." A young girl around 11 or 12 stood in front of us, wringing her hands. Her yellow ringlets fell to her shoulders with a straw hat perched on her head. Wide blue ribbons hung over the brim's back. Smiling shyly, she shuffled feet encased in scuffed kid boots. I warmed to her instantly. "And who are you?" Papa inquired, softly. "Cassandra," the child responded, casting her eyes downward. "Cassandra Plum." Charlotte's younger sister's appearance differed from the rest of the family. Her small nose turned up pertly at the end and her blue eyes looked like calm pond water. Soft-spoken and shy, she hovered close to the breakfast table and inched to my side. When she came close enough, I wrapped my arm around her waist. She pressed into my embrace. "I had to use the water closet," she stated, demurely. "When I came out, Mum and Dad were gone. They went into breakfast with the rest of your family," I explained, offering the child a seat. "You're welcome to join us. We're eating al fresco with morning. They'll worry over me." The child hesitated but eyed our morning fare ravenously. "I should find them." "Nonsense," Papa announced, summoning Yates. "You'll see them soon enough. Eat your breakfast out here with us. We'll soon to become your family. You know that, don't you?" "Lottie is getting married," Cassandra announced, proudly. "That's why we've come here. She's marrying our brother, Joel," Grayson added, pouring a glass of milk for the child. "Here are your eggs now." Cassandra sat in the chair Yates pulled out for her and lifted her knife and fork. She cut her sausage daintily and ate it with small bites. How different from the rest of the family, I thought, as I watched her butter a slice of toast. "So this is where you've gotten off to," Mrs. Plum chastised, sauntering briskly toward the garden patio. When she arrived, she grasped her daughter by the arm and yanked her to her feet. "We were worried sick, we were. I got lost, Mum," Cassandra excused herself. "These nice people offered me breakfast." "Well, you've had it, haven't you?" The mother shook her child by the arm. "Trust you to decide your tula-da-da for the rest of us. Now, march." She prodded Cassandra's back with her open palm, urging her toward the house. "Begging your pardon, madam," Papa stated, rising. "Would you mind telling us who you are and why you treat this child roughly?" "Yes, I would mind," the woman shrilled, turning toward our father. "As you'd have it, I'm Ursula Plum. My daughter, Charlotte, is about to marry the high and mighty's son, Sir Joel something or other. Papa's face grew scarlet with rage. Seething, he began to sputter uncontrollably. I stared at him in awe, then rose to hand him a glass of water. "Mind your tongue, Mrs. Yates broke in quickly. "You happen to address Sir Joel Everstow." Nonplussed, Mrs. Plum stared at Papa for a moment, then Yates. Then, grabbing Cassandra by the elbow, marched toward the French doors. They disappeared inside the house. "Well," Papa remarked, regaining his seat. "Well is right," Grayson muttered, his face pale. His hand trembled when he poured another cup of tea. Silently we sat around the table sipping the calming beverage. However, none of us felt the effects of the soothing tea. Every time the Plum family appeared, we became shaken by their uncouth antics. "Whatever's the matter with Joel?" I muttered out loud. "Doesn't he realize? Doesn't he see how vulgar they are? He's in love, Priscilla, my dear," Papa stated, sinking back into his chair. "Unfortunately, he doesn't see anything at the moment. All he sees is Charlotte Plum." "Indeed, there is not much to see there," I remarked, sharply. "Indeed," Grayson echoed. "Yes, indeed," Papa added.